Cool. So just a bit background about myself. I started my career in PMO, portfolio management. Built a PMO in Dual Coming Welsh Water, which is in South Wales, here in South Wales. And then my next job was in Lloyds Banking Group as a project manager, where I worked on the program to the TSB sale of the bank, which was really interesting. So I worked on that massive program, and then went to Babcock International Group and spent 5 years at the head of projects and governance, delivering a portfolio of business and IT change across the globe. I then started iCoTech Group, and my first customer was Companies House. So I helped lead their transformation program at Companies House. It was really great experience. And then iCoTech now has grown today to deliver technology services to BAYS, IPO, ONS, and ACAS as well. So that's just a bit of a short, sharp, sweet summary of iCoTech and myself. So next slide, please, Giles. So something that Giles will touch on today, I guess, is our approach and the way in which we work with our partners and our stakeholders. But we deliver value at pace. So that's what we do. It's everything that we do in our business. So it's an internal mission statement, but also external as well. The way we do that is we create good relationships and are always networking. We're always learning and sharing our learning. So the idea here today is that we're sharing what we think we've done well with Giles and BAYS, and also we're researching, innovating, always got new ideas, and we deliver the best tools and systems and have, in my opinion, the best people to do that. So so that's just a bit of our approach, really. What we do, so we break our services down to kind of 4 sections. We've got solutions, custom Microsoft 365 solutions, products, which are productized categories, services, so we support those, and then consulting, so a bit of change consulting, PMO consulting, that kind of thing. So that's just a bit of an overview of our offering. Great, look at that, it's in sync, Giles, we're doing well there. So as a Microsoft partner, we have to specialize in certain applications, but we specialize in Power BI, Power Apps, and projects. So in delivering these solutions, we obviously have experience in other technologies in Microsoft 365, but our competencies from Microsoft are in those 3 applications above the line then. Cool. So delivering portfolio management. So just by way of introduction and setting the scene, I was at Companies House, midway through 2019, and me and Giles were introduced, and Giles was managing the portfolio at BAYS at that time, and we talked about what we were doing in Companies House, and then Giles came on board, and we delivered the portfolio management solution into BAYS Digital, and Giles is going to take you through his experience from his lens of that delivery of the portfolio management system across BAYS Digital. Over to you, Giles. Thank you.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. It's good to be here, and Giles finally managed to twist my arm enough to get me to come and present. So, but it's good to be here, and it's nice to be able to talk about some of the stuff that we've done together, because I really think that it has been a really positive relationship with iCoTech, and quite a close relationship as well, which is really nice and quite refreshing. So rather than sort of outsourcing to a supplier to create something, it's good to work on sort of quite a close, iterative, sort of sprint-based approach, like an actual agile approach, God forbid. So just for the content of my presentation, we're going to be looking a bit at the what we were doing, what we were trying to create, and then we'll look a bit at some of the key parts of that, so the customer journey and the prioritization model. Then we'll move on to sort of the implementation with iCoTech, and then the benefits and lessons learned, because sort of I think that's probably where I want to focus mainly on. But I'll just run this through to give you a good idea of what we were doing. So when it comes to sort of the requirements, when I joined as BAYS' head of PMO, and there was the digital department lacked a coherent and structured approach to portfolio management, and so and then the digital project delivery process. So this was already in flight when I arrived, creating this customer journey, and it was really to streamline that process and create something that the rest of the department and then those arm's length bodies that we worked with and partner organizations were able to see whereabouts in the process they were, what the timeframes were, who was looking at their projects and who was making decisions. The principles of prioritization, sort of one of the key things that I'll focus on slightly later, the importance of that prioritization within the process, because we had a huge number of ideas and problems that we were attempting to tackle that the business partners were categorizing, but we didn't have a way of prioritizing them. So whether or not we were linked to the single departmental plan, whether we were looking at, say, potentially ministerial manifesto commitments or ministerial direction, so how we were strategically placed. And then for our own digital directorate, it was about creating a single source of truth for all those projects. So at the time, there were lots of, all the delivery managers and the projects were all independently monitored and controlled through a variety of different systems. So there wasn't the opportunity to critique and to review those in a holistic way, but also to provide that single source of truth to management, senior leadership, and also some of the stakeholders that we were working to. Underneath the sort of the two areas that I really wanted to focus on, which came out in the development of something that we potentially should have focused on a bit more, was those detailed sub processes. So it was good to have this single sort of end-to-end customer journey. However, it was really important to then focus on those sub processes for each stage of that journey, and developing those. And that's potentially an area that I should have identified earlier and delivered more of. And then the mandating of the process and the responsibility of the portfolio board. So this was good. What we really wanted to create was something that was quite flexible, rather than you will attend each step of the way, or the end of each step of the agile process. This was much more flexible, so we could potentially say, well, actually, you've got funding, everything's in place. Please escalate to the portfolio board if there are any issues, but you have the funding in place and we want you to continue. So the portfolio tool would give them that view on the risks and the issues that would then be able to be escalated to the portfolio board. So the customer journey just gives you a basic outline. So the initial assessment that was done by the business partners, we wanted to create sort of a repository of information, and these are some of the requirements provided to Joel. We wanted to create this repository of information of which problems there were, what ideas were coming through. So it gave us an opportunity to then analyze that and to group some of that data, say, actually, do we have any solutions that would be out of the box that we've already delivered? Are there groups of problems that require a similar solution, which then could form part of our strategic approach? Then pre-discovery, so this was sort of reviewing a bit more of the details, so you get a bit more information rather than just the problem of the idea. The business partners would provide sort of this high-level requirements, and this would come to a triage board, which I'll go into in it now. So this would be heads of functions, so the head of business, the business partners, myself, there would be the lead in technology, would come together and review these projects and prioritize them, and then make a decision on which ones would move forwards to discovery. So that was delegated by the director. The authority was delegated to us, which was really useful to push forward the projects and move with a bit of pace. Then the discovery alpha, which you're probably all very aware of in projects, so a sort of fairly traditional agile process. But what I really want to focus on is where the decisions were being made and where we wanted to try and add in that flexibility with the portfolio board. So the triage board was given the authority to deliver or to make the decisions on the initial projects, and then the portfolio board was there to help prioritize the resourcing from the digital department, but also then the escalation of issues and risks. This is the idea behind it. Rather than it being a rigid, everyone has to come through every step of the way, it would be a case of, right, if you need direction, guidance, input, decision making, then there was an opportunity to raise issues to the portfolio board. There was also the change authority board, which ensured that we had as seamlessly as possible transition from a project into BAU, ensuring that the technology team were engaged with early on. So there was a representative from the technology team, which was the main focus of the Change Authority Board within the triage group, to identify what was required from them. And then, as is traditional, PMO overseeing the process, making sure that people were actually adhering to this process, following the steps, raising appropriate issues and risks to the portfolio board, that the funding was actually in place, so the information being provided was correct. So there was that sort of that filter process through the PMO before it went to the portfolio board. Moving on to prioritization, as I said, it was it's all very well and good having the portfolio tool full of projects and a whole bunch of ideas, but actually not knowing which ideas to move forwards for, because of it being based just on sort of guesswork, realistically, and a lack of understanding of a strategic direction. It was important to create this prioritization model that was actually aligned to the business and aligned to what the senior leaders want. So we got the senior civil servants within the digital functions sit down together. We took the continuous improvement model. This was the original continuous improvement model that we took, and then we adapted it, and we looked at several areas that we would want to input in to the prioritization, and then sort of create that structure to the way we resource projects. So we wanted to be able to say we've got this internal resource to deliver projects. So we had an area that was to focus on sort of the size and complexity of the project, which would then we'd be able to say, actually, these are fairly small projects that we want to be working on to develop our capability, but those larger, more high profile projects, we could then potentially use external suppliers, but with internal oversight. So the prioritization model was really important at reviewing our portfolio of work once we had that in the tool, and then providing us with what strategic direction we wanted to go in, or could influence that strategic direction. So this is kind of where I want to get on to in discussion of sort of the actual implementation of the project and the work with iCoTech. So we had some really, when we were in the office, this was fortunate prior to COVID, we had some really close working relationships with iCoTech, and Joel himself actually was influential in this, and he came to Bays, and we got the stakeholders in a room, we got those people who were using the tool in a room, and we used these workshops to really define the details of what we wanted from the tool and what information we wanted to gain out of it. So we spent a reasonable amount of time focusing on that and doing that work up front and engaging with those stakeholders and iterating as we went through, and potentially spent more time than we expected on that. However, the working relationship with iCoTech and the way that we delivered this in the waves, as I think Joel mentioned earlier, was that we were able to, so we broke it up into waves, so we were able to change what we were trying to deliver at different stages. So areas of, so the discovery work, which may have taken a bit longer, might then be offset. So one of the deliverables that we wanted to provide would be pushed into a later wave, or indeed if we progressed through and we thought, actually, we don't want to do that now, these two items, and we could pull something from a later wave into the earlier wave. So it was really nice to see that sort of sprint, sort of Toyota lean principles, and the idea of sort of actually working in an agile manner rather than just having this set of a project that we're going to deliver, and these are the deliverables, and the things don't change. Obviously, it adds a bit of complexity in managing the scope and ensuring that you have a supplier that's able to deliver in that manner. But iCoTech were really flexible in that approach, and we sort of went through several iterations of that scope, but ensured that everyone knew at the same time what we were trying to deliver, and each time there was a change, we logged that. Which is also really important. So the development of the tool itself, so we wanted a number of things for Bays Digital, so pages for prioritization, finance, risks, issues, use of creation of Power BI dashboards. This is something that really added value from our perspective for the portfolio board. One of the key outputs that I wanted from developing the tool and having all that information was that there's a uniform approach to creating the dashboards. So everyone is seeing the same information at each level. So you can aggregate that data up, but if you were going to look at a specific project, you would see the highlights of that project. So you'd see the risks, the finance, you'd see sort of the timeline, the project deliverables, the KPIs, what had been hit, what had been missed. But at the same time, if you then went to a higher level, you could say, Carl as a director would be able to say, actually, well, what is my portfolio doing? How is it delivering against finances? What's the overall financial, what is the overall budget or cost of all of my projects? How are we doing with regards to hitting KPIs or milestones? What are the key risks? But it would be in a very, very similar format so that you were seeing the same things all the time. So you're able to draw the eye to the important information every time. Automated RAGs, so we semi-automated to begin with, but then the idea further down the road was to create fully automated RAGs. Something that we developed that wasn't an initial key deliverable, but actually in those discovery sessions came out was really important, was the idea creation. So the business partners would go out, it would be sort of working with the business, working with the different directorates and groups of directorates. They would come back with the problem statements, they would come back with the partners of solutionizing, they would come back with this information, and they had a couple of hundred different ideas that were on the go or that had actually been brought to their attention that really needed a home, and they needed some way of collating that information, analyzing it, looking for similarities and trends, that type of thing. So we really pushed the idea creation, and that's potentially something Joel could mention later. Then the coaching and training, really good. So Joel helped out throughout, and his team. On the implementation and iteration, I think I'll bring this, so it's in the key lessons. So I'll jump onto the key lessons now. So things we learn, and I learned from the process, the early and continuous engagement with stakeholders. So rather than just those workshops, those initial workshops, once we had delivered something, we then ran it back past those stakeholders to gain their sort of input on changes. The clear scope, I said at the beginning, and getting that signed off, but also having an option to add, to take on further work. So we had a set budget that was to deliver specifically what we wanted, or what we thought we wanted, or what I thought I wanted. So it was really important to actually, I found, to have an extra chunk of cash or an extra chunk of funding for those known unknowns, to be sort of very Donald Rumsfeld. I think that's something that we missed, or I missed, and then going through the business case and the process again of trying to get that funding released was a missed opportunity, because you missed that chance to take advantage of those of that iteration, which might have brought the project to sort of more success. Training and development of the PMO. So as we went through the development life cycle, there was continuous engagement with the PMO, who were going to be the gatekeepers and the managers of this tool. So it was really important for us to develop them, because this was a new tool, something they hadn't used before, creating the Gantt charts, reviewing the information in Power BI and creating the dashboards. Probably one of the biggest takeaways from this, and I think I'm running on a bit far longer than I expected, but one of the key things here, I think, in this was the implementation manager. So for the first phase of this, the work with iCoTech and the development of the tool, I tried to do this in line with the work that I was doing within the PMO. So as head of PMO, so looking at the resourcing, looking at the assurance processes, looking at the structure of the directorate, working on some of the strategy. I tried to work as the implementation manager at the same time, which ended up being less than a success. So if I was going to suggest, and if anyone was going to take this forward, I think a dedicated implementation manager would be useful. And then when we went through the second and third phase, we actually costed in an implementation manager, and that person came in and took that burden away from me, which was absolutely a game changer. One, not only for my ability to do my job, but also the deployment of the tool and the implementation of it. So, and I think to the final point, so that implementation manager came in and started drawing together all of that information with all these disparate projects that were all maintained in different types of registers and different formats. So an implementation manager from the start would have been far more useful, because all of that information would have been collated before the tool was ready to have it inputted into. Then when we came to deploying the tool, that information would all be in a single format and could have been uploaded to the tool, which then would have created a much greater, it would have shown the tool working in a much better way, rather than sort of part information. So then there were individuals who would question the validity of the information in the tool. They would ask questions around, well, why isn't this the financial information of this project in there? Why aren't the risks updated in here? What are the issues in this? Why are there no issues? So I think that implementation, so 4 or 5, if anyone is looking to develop a PPM tool, or any of the, or deliver any tool that has a reliance on data from your own business, then I think having that implementation manager to oversee a dedicated resource, and then ensuring that that information is all created up front and in one location would be vital. Just moving on to a bit on the benefits and the lessons learned. So from within Bayes Digital, one of the areas of concern that was raised by staff within digital was the fact that no one really knew what we were delivering. So it was very opaque. There wasn't the transparency. The employees and staff weren't able to look at what we were doing and actually how we were benefiting the department, and how we were, how our strategy and the projects that we were delivering were aligned to the strategy of the department, which would then be providing that benefit to citizens, to government. So it lacked a certain amount of buy-in from them. It was almost as though they felt that they had sort of been disconnected from what we were delivering. So creating that the idea was to create that portfolio, which would then allow access for the director and those people within digital to see what we were delivering, critique it, see where they could get involved, and see whether they were having an impact. Secondly, the resource planning. So getting to a point where we could look at the project, see who was what resource was working on which project, and then identify, looking further out, what projects were coming along and how we were going to resource up those projects. So we had a number of different ways of resourcing projects. So either we had an internal development capability, which was really strong, but actually it was a team that was developing and growing. So we had to pick projects quite strategically and what was going to help develop them, and with the resource they had. There was also the opportunity to bring in contractors or a team to help deliver in collaboration with delivery managers and potentially some of the other resource within digital, or we could go fully outsourced for the delivery of the project with oversight from the delivery managers. So there was quite a lot here to unpack and to understand how we were delivering projects and what we were trying to do, but essentially it was to forecast out that resourcing. I've mentioned the reporting and the importance of Power BI and creating a sort of single source of truth and being able to see that. One of the other benefits from the sort of centralized data is being able to do a bit of trend analysis. So I think being able to say what we had spent the money on, what benefit we were having, would be really important for our group, so corporate services, to be able to speak to our Director General and say, well, this is how much work Bayes Digital has delivered. These are the areas we have impacted, and this is what we have achieved, and for X amount of money. There is also the opportunity to look at the data from which departments or which directorates and which areas of the business are utilizing Bayes Digital, but then conversely, which areas aren't using Bayes Digital. So we can then sort of dive into that detail and go, well, why isn't that directorate using Bayes Digital? Potentially they're using their own shadow IT system. Perhaps they don't need us. Perhaps they've got a whole host of problems they don't even think about asking digital to solve. So yeah, so that data and the trend analysis would be really useful. So some of the issues I would suggest that this lack of the tool would produce, and potentially we had beforehand, was misallocation of resource. So either that's people put on the wrong projects, people not projects not being resourced correctly, missed opportunities, inability to track the actual delivery of the projects, identify issues and risks, and be able to raise that up to the appropriate level in an appropriate time frame, and then also to be able to show the mitigation of those risks and what we're actually trying to do, what we had done. So then when a project isn't delivered on time, we can actually attribute a reason to why that project hasn't been delivered on time. An inability to deliver on strategy. Realistically, we had a strategy. However, we weren't able to evidence that we were only partially able to evidence that we were delivering on that strategy, and we were delivering to the direction of the department and the ministerial direction. So if we were able to collate that information in one place, we could say, we could map those projects that we had delivered to those outcomes that were wanted by ministers or the department itself. Lessons learned has always been a bugbear of mine across. So I previously worked for Transport for London, and before that I worked for a large engineering consultancy. There's always a problem with lessons learned. We never really collect the information. We never really retain it. There's difficulty with access to those lessons learned, if they're even in there. So it was a good repository of information. Even if you didn't create a lessons learned report, you would be able to track back through projects of similar nature and look at the risks and issues that came to life during the life of that life cycle of that project. And so you could learn from that, even if you hadn't written up a specific lessons learned report. And then I suppose finally, sort of touching on customer satisfaction, this is something that sort of really fell out at the end. Although we focused pretty much all of our attention on developing the tool, what we wanted from Bayes Digital, how we were tracking the progress of projects, sort of something that came up, and actually it was from the implementation manager, was started discussing about how do we validate what we're doing, and how do we validate the success and how well we are delivering against these projects and for the directorates, and creating, and this is something that we didn't get onto before I shifted to the program that I'm working on now, is creating those feedback loops. So how do we actually know that what we're delivering is what the directorate, what the project, the SRO or the project team wants? So as we go through that process, how do we get information and feedback on, one, our ability to deliver, but two, what we're actually delivering? So something potentially to focus on, or if I could go back to the beginning, that is something I would feed into the tool and have that as another page or another piece of the tool to capture that regular feedback from customers. We'll move now on to some questions.